Welcome to this lecture on Module 2, Design and Software Process. So today we'll see the design rules, which are basically categorized into principles, standards, and guidelines. So what are basically design rules and why they are needed? So they are to be followed to design for maximum usability. Previously we have seen the notion of what is called as usability, which is nothing but the goal of interaction design. So these are the rules to be followed to increase the usability of any interaction and ultimately the product. So these design rules are now categorized, which are based on their authority, generality, and abstraction. So what is authority? So based on whether the rule is only suggested or that rule must be followed in the interaction design, whether it is must or not, based on that the authority varies. Next is generality. So whether that particular rule is applicable to a certain or a few applications or many applications, that rule applies to many applications in general, that will be more general rule, and that rule applies to a very few applications, that will be a less general rule. Next is abstraction. Abstraction pertains to whether it is that rule is specific to the design details of a particular application. That means whether that rule dictates how that design should be designed at the lower level, that will be more specific. Otherwise, if it is simply guiding on the higher levels of the design, that will be more abstract. So based on that, the rules are categorized. Next is principles of usability. We'll see principles of usability, that they will give the general understanding of how the design should be done. We'll also see standards and guidelines, which are be giving or which give the direction for interface design, we can say. We'll ultimately see the design patterns, which basically capture the common way in which the softwares are designed. They are called as the patterns. They reuse the design disciplines followed in some earlier products, and they will be um, once again used in some later products. That is what is called as design pattern. So now we'll see in detail the types of design rule. So the first type is principle or principles. As you can see in the diagram, we'll come to standards and guidelines with respect to this diagram. First, we'll see principles. So they are abstract, as you have seen previously. They give a high level guideline, means how the design should be there. They give the high level view of that or guidelines for that. Abstract design rules. They have got low authority. So it's not that must that they must be followed, and higher generality. They apply to a larger set of applications as a whole. They are not specific. Next, with respect to the diagram that simply differentiates between guidelines and standards, if you can see the diagram, the x-axis, there is increasing authority. That means whether that rule is must or not, that is increasing. So here in the y-axis, increasing generality, how many applications the particular rule applies to. So if you see standards, they have got increasing authority. So standards are the type of rules which have got higher authority. That means they are must for that particular design, whereas guidelines have got increasing generality. As we go on, in y-axis, we increase the generality, we go to the guidelines, or we get the guidelines, or the guidelines have got increasing generality. So with respect to that, as we already seen, standards are specific design rules. They apply to specific applications and their intricacies. They have got high authority. They must be used there. Rather, that requirement of meeting that standard is more, and they have got limited application. They are specific to some applications, and that's why they pertain to those limited set of applications. Whereas guidelines, they have got lower authority. It's not that we must follow the guidelines. That means lower authority, and obviously they pertain to more applications, and that's why they are said to be more general. Now we will see first the principles to support usability. So out of principles, standards and guidelines, now we are seeing the principles first. And there are three primary principles which are learnability, flexibility and robustness. So pertaining to learnability, we'll first see the sub principles which apply to learnability, which are called as predictability, synthesizability, familiarity, generalizability and consistency. We'll come back to each individual in detail. So the principle of learnability, that means the ease with which new users can begin effective interaction and achieve max. In short, basically it means whether that interface is learnable, in that not only the new users can begin effective interaction, but also achieve maximal performance out of using that particular application. So this is what is called as learnability. Next is flexibility, the multiplicity of ways the user and system exchange information, various ways in which they can communicate, we can say, effectively exchanging the information from one to the other. Next is robustness, the level of support provided to the user in determining successful achievement as well as assessment of goal directed behavior. We have previously seen with respect to the gulf of execution and evaluation that user, before attempting something, basically sets a goal, and after doing or performing some actions with respect to that goal, that user will evaluate whether that goal was achieved with that execution. So robustness basically applies how far the system supports or the interface supports that user in determining whether that goal was achieved and at what percentage that goal was achieved. So now we'll see the principles of learnability as we have seen previously: predictability, synthesizability, familiarity, generalizability and consistency. So the first is predictability, determining effect of future actions based on past interaction history. That is what is called as predictability. That basically means that if you are using one interface and you've gone through some actions, then you can be able to determine what will be the effect of the actions that you have taken so far. Whatever actions that you have gone through, what they will result into. That is what is called as predictability. Next is the part of it is operation visibility. For example, you got a menu where the operations can be performed, but they are not constantly visible. So operation visibility pertains to whether the operations are constantly visible on the screen, which can be performed or not. This is operation visibility. More the operation visibility, more it is easy for the user to perform or gaze those predict those operations, we can say. So there is a trade-off between the screen space utilization and operation visibility, we can say. And that's why there are menus. They hide the operations into a main operation. For example, in edit, you have got multiple sub options which are hidden. Once you click on that menu, edit menu, you get the names of the sub options that you can do with respect to that edit menu. So learnability, you can predict what will happen with that particular visible option or operation. Next is synthesizability. Synthesizing, assessing the effect of past actions. Whatever actions that you are taken so far, what they will result into, that is what is called as synthesizability. So that is exactly opposite to predictability. In the predictability, we have seen that what actions, the future actions will result into what effect based on what actions that user has taken previously. That is what is called as predictability. Whereas synthesizability basically means assessing the effect of past actions, whatever the actions that user has already taken. Based on that, what effect will be uh, achieved. That is, that if that can be assessed, that means it is synthesizable. So we'll see the immediate versus the eventual honesty. So in the case of immediate and eventual honesty, that means whether the changes made by an operation are visible to the user immediately or explicitly seeking that from the system. We'll see some example. So one example is deleting a file from a folder in GUI, graphical user interface. So if you try to delete a file, you click on that file and then hit delete, that icon of that file will be immediately gone. It will not be visible. So you get the immediate sort of information that the file has been deleted. Had that been the case in the CLI, if you remove a file using a command from a folder, you would have required to explicitly fire the ls command to check that where the file is no longer available in that folder. So this is what is called as immediate honesty and eventual honesty. In the case of GUI, it is the immediately available, the information that the file has been deleted. You get the confirmation when you see the icon gone. And in the case of CLI, you will have to explicitly execute one extra command to see the file is no longer available. Next, the example is file download. Once you download a file from, let us say, from a web browser or web page, it might have already been downloaded, but if it is not visible or there is no such notification, you might have seen that you constantly or repeatedly click on the link to download that file, and ultimately you realize that there are multiple copies of the file downloaded once you see the download folder. So there are many such files with the same name in parentheses, the numbers of the copies given. So that is what is called as eventual honesty. The next sub-principle of learnability is familiarity. How prior knowledge applies to a new system. So in the case of let us say word processors, the people using typewriter are at ease when using the word processors. For example, they know just pressing the enter, they can form a new, they will be taken to a new line, or they can how they can start with a new paragraph by pressing that enter. So they are familiar. The prior knowledge is available of interacting with the word processor with respect to the typewriter. Now, Jordan and other authors call this familiarity as guessability. You already seen what is called as affordance. So just by seeing the nature of that interaction element, for example, push button, when we see the push button, we get to know that that has to be pressed. Now it's the other thing that we need to have a pointing device as mouse to press that, but the nature of that push button is similar to what we already seen on some other similar interfaces, which applies that the button has to be pressed. That is what is called as familiarity. Next is generalizability. So extending specific interaction knowledge to new situations. Now that may be in single applications or multiple applications. In single applications, for example, generalizability can be one example of generalizability is that in drawing applications specifically, if you know that an ellipse tool can be used to draw a circle, let us say for example by simply pressing the shift button you get a circle from the same ellipse tool, then you generalize that thing to identify or to conclude that you can draw a square by using the rectangle tool. Once again, pressing the shift key for example, or even without pressing the shift key, that can generate the square. The meaning here is that when you knew that ellipse tool can be used to draw a circle, you generalize that knowledge to conclude that rectangle tool then can be used to draw a square. In the case of applications or multiple applications, the common editing shortcuts like Control C, Control V, etc., they are consistently used, and that's why once you know in one application that Control C is there for copy, you can use the same combination in other applications as well. So you generalize knowledge from the previous application to some other applications, and that's why this is the aim and advantage of standards. Control C is to be used for copy. If that standard is followed, one on knowledge gain in one, for the user it becomes easy because whatever knowledge he or she has got in one application can be reused, can be generalized in using the other applications, and that is the advantage of standards. So next is consistency. It is a likeliness, or sorry, it is the likeness in input output behavior arising from similar situations or task objectives. Similarity we can see in input output behavior. So with respect to input, let me give one example that you want to move something in a GUI on screen. Let us say for example to up, down, towards left or right. Now you have got some key combinations, for example EXSD, where E may indicate or may be there for moving that object up, where it is proportion, I mean on the keyboard plane, E is on top, X is at the bottom, S is at the left, and D is at the right. So similar similar knowledge, consistent knowledge. For example, if it is to be moved top, so E is at the top, and that's why that becomes consistent with your general understanding of what is top and what is left and something like that. With respect to output, for example, in the case of notifications, especially error messages, you might have seen that the messages are given in different colors, RGB, where the red indicates the message with high importance or immediate attention, where green may indicate success, and blue may indicate, for example, only advisory. So things like that. Now we'll see the next main principle, which is flexibility. And for flexibility, there are dialog initiative, multi-threading, task migratability, substitutability, and customizability. These are the principles which are there for flexibility as the main principle. Now, what is dialog initiative? So we have seen flexibility to the multiplicity of ways in which the user and system can exchange the information. Here, dialogue initiative pertains to the freedom from system imposed constraints on input dialogue. In short, whether the user is constrained into using the way in which input can be given. So there are two things. One is called as system primitiveness, system primitiveness and user preemptiveness. Preemption, you might have seen in operating system, there is a primitive processes. So same concept is here. Whether system initiates the conversation or communication in the interaction, in that case it is said to be system is primitive. And if the user initiates or has got the freedom to initiate the conversation or communication, we have seen that we can say that the interface is user primitive. Now one example is there. For example, local word processors like Microsoft Word or LibreOffice word processor. You know that if one file is shared in network, local network, and one person is editing that, no other user can edit that. It is locked. But that lock is not there in the cloud word processors like Google Doc. Many persons, many users can simultaneously use that document, edit that document. So there is no such constraints, and the limited constraints are there. Now, in the case of command line, for example, in Linux, there are commands. Once the command is entered, until the operation is complete, the next prompt is not visible, so that you can continue with the next command. And that's why if you append that command with ampersand, the after executing or entering the command and hitting enter, the prompt will be visible. That's why the shell will not wait for the current operation to finish, and this is how the user can go with the next operation. So this is what is called as flexibility of giving the inputs. Next is multi-threading. This is the ability of system to support user interaction for more than one task at a time. So either that can be concurrent interaction or interleaving, in that user can simultaneously interact with multiple applications, or it may be that the interactions are overlapped in such a way that it appears to the user that it is interacting with multiple applications at the same time, but actually internally the communication is, or the interaction is, with one application at a single time instant. It can be a multi-modality, which means multi-threading, where modality pertains to communication channel. That means communication channel, how many communication channels are available. For example, in input channels, you want to zoom on a browser, you can simultaneously use two channels, one keyboard and one mouse. Just hitting the control key, if you use the mouse wheel, you can zoom appropriately on the browser. In the case of output channels, for example, if error message is there, it may be supported with some beep sound. So there are two channels used, multimodality. The text is being displayed along with the sound, beep sound. Next is task migratability, passing responsibility for task execution between user and the system. Who will execute the task? Whether user and the system. One good example is spell check in word processors. The spell check can be done by the computer automatically, or by the user manually. Here you might have seen that there are instances where, for example, people's names as well as some intentional repeating of some words, they will be taken to be wrong words or highlighted as errors by the automatic computer spell check. In those cases, first the responsibility will be given to computer to execute the task, and those errors which are basically not errors in this context can be corrected then by the user by doing the manual spell check afterwards. So this is migratability. Anyone, either the user or the system, can do the task. Substitutivity, which is the next principle of flexibility. Substitutivity, whether equivalent values of input and output can be substituted for each other, whether those combinations are allowed, or whether that flexibility of changing input to output and using the output as input, not changing input to output, whether basically output can be changed as the next input, that is what is called as flexibility. Now in the case of margin, one example, the values can be given in inches or centimeters or maybe points or something else, some other units as well, or even the one margin can be said to be proportional to the height and width of the paper. That is what is called as flexibility. We are substituting one value with respect to some other values. There is representation multiplicity. Now temperature can be displayed in digit number format, or that can be displayed graphically. If it is displayed in number format, that can be given accurately. The digits will be important, or if it is accurate results are required, it can be given in number format, or only a trend is required, how the temperature is going up, how it is going down. So a graph can be presented. That is what is called as the multiple ways in which the values can be represented. Equal opportunity. Output and input use interchangeably. So the thing that you have seen previously, for example, in the case of spreadsheet, if cyclic representation is allowed, so if input is given to a cell and there is a formula is present in other cell, that corresponding value will be present in that other cell. Otherwise, if you are inserting a value in that other cell, the corresponding value will be present in the first cell. One more example is drawing a line. You can using a direct manipulation on the screen, you can simply draw a line using mouse, for example, or any other pointing device, where the length will be calculated accordingly by the computer. On the other hand, you can simply give the length of that line and the computer will draw the line for you. That is the substitutivity with respect to line drawing. Next principle of flexibility is customizability. It is the modifiability of the user interface by user. If user is able to modify the user interface, that is called as adaptability. And if the system itself can modify the interface with respect to user actions, for example, or actions performed by the user previously, that is called as adaptivity. For example, I'll give, so for example, in using some applications like presentation softwares, you may change the different dialog boxes or different windows available. For example, in the case of Photoshop, you can either dock different layer windows and things like that. So as they are required, you can change the interface style. That is modifiability by the user, or the system by seeing the user actions can change the interface with respect to the user intelligently. That is customizability. So adaptability, whether the user can modify the interface, and adaptivity, whether the system can adapt the interface with respect to user. The next is robustness, the third principle of usability. And we'll see as the principle supporting robustness as observability, recoverability, responsiveness, and task conformance. So the first is observability. It is the ability of user to evaluate the internal state of the system from its perceivable representation. We'll see some examples. So browsability. Whether the user is able to observe the internal state of the system from whatever that is visible on the screen, you can say, or the output device. So browsability pertains to, for example, one example is document outline. In the case of code editors, you might have seen that one short representation of the whole layout of that program or script is visible on top right or top left, for example, left. So that is browsability. The whole document is not visible that time, but you get a short representation of that somewhere on the top right or top left as the outline. Now defaults are there. For example, in the case of a form, while giving input, there may be some default values already present. For example, today's date. That is what is called as defaults. That helps the user to enter the value. Reachability. Navigation possibility from the states seen. That is what is called as reachability. How far I can go in that document. That can be identified with respect to the current state visible of that document or that web page. Persistence. Now, whenever beep sound is given, whenever, for example, you have one calendar event and a beep sound is heard or beep sound is heard for that. And if you simply ignore that for some other important task at hand, you may forget as the user. But if a persistent message notification is there in one corner, that means it is the persistence of that interaction that is constantly visible, and the less chance is there for you to forget that thing. You might have seen that if emails are there with one conversation, the number is there on the top right of that particular conversation. That will show you how many new emails are there with respect to that conversation. For example, in WhatsApp messages, you might have seen that the number of messages in that group may be visible. So it's a persistent notification. So operation visibility, whether the state of we already seen that operation visibility previously. So whether the number of operations that a user can perform are constantly visible to the user or not. Best if they are visible, it will be easy for the user to know what different operations that user can perform, etc. Next principle for robustness is recoverability. It is the ability of user to take corrective actions once an error has been recognized. Here once again, reachability. That means whether the user can get to a successful state or the next proper state from the current erroneous state. Reachability. Now there are two things. One is called as forward and backward recovery. In the case of forward recovery, only the next successful actions can be done, not the previous erroneous actions. They cannot be undone. Whereas in the case of backward recovery, if you attempted some actions and then you conclude that they were erroneous, you can simply press, for example, Ctrl Z to erase out those erroneous actions, and you can get back to one proper state. That is backward recovery. And forward recovery means that the actions are not undoable. You are only allowed to go next from the current erroneous state. There is something called as commensurate effort. That means easily undone actions should be easily doable. For example, if it is difficult to undelete a file,